Hello. Good to be. I feel like I haven't been preaching. Like I preach occasionally, but I haven't preached here in Forney for a long time. They keep sending me to Kaufman to set those heathens straight. But I'm so glad to be here with you. I want to say what's up to my 5 o'clock people, which is really weird because I'm standing back there right now. Hi, me. Hi. That's going to kill at 5. I know you don't, guys. Anyway, they're going to be cracking up. Anyway, I'm so glad that you guys are here today. I'm so glad to be here with you. And I want to tell you a story from the life of Rocky. And to hear the story, we've got to go all the way back 20 years ago when I was in college. Yes, I know. I look super young. I was in college 20 years ago. So it's 20 years ago, and I go to this private Christian college. Here's the thing about Christian colleges, right? They're super, super expensive, right? Like that's the thing about a private college. The smaller it is, the more expensive it's going to be. Dallas Christian College was pretty expensive. And I remember being there, and they're like a seminary. You know, they just train ministers, and you go there, you learn about the Bible, you do all that stuff, you serve in ministry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to plug Dallas Christian College. Go Crusaders. Get information from me at the back of the desk. No, I'm just kidding. But I remember being there, and it might surprise you to know that private colleges, even Christian ones, are not very diverse. I know you're shocked, right? So even while I was there in the late 90s, I was probably I don't know, I might have been like the only student there of like Mexican descent. And so that was my outstanding characteristic, was my beautiful golden brown skin. And so when people would see me walking down the hallway, they wouldn't be like, "Hey, what's up, Rocky?" Which is not a difficult name to remember. They'd be like, "What's up, Mexican?" And I'd be like, "What?" And they'd be like, "Odele, Mexican," which is less funny, by the way. Just in case you did not know that. But I didn't mind it, right? Like you play ball, it's their world, you're just going to school there, whatever. I justified it to myself, and I would tell myself, this doesn't really bother me. And it didn't, except for I'm still preaching about it 20 years later, but whatever. This doesn't really bother me. Like, you take it with a grain of salt. It's not the worst thing that I've ever been called. I remember when I was in middle school being called a burrito one time. Like, you go through the list, Beaner, that's really offensive. Don't say that. And then somebody called me a taco once, which I'm like, how's that offensive? Tacos are delicious. But, by the way, don't call your Mexican friends taco, by the way. So, but the only reason I bring it up is because I remember that even though everybody there was friendly and they loved me, and I don't think it was anything intentional that they were doing to hurt me, but what I realized is that every time I heard that, it was like what I felt was, it was just like a subtle reminder that there's something different about you than me. And that difference is the most important thing about who you are. And that difference is like, maybe you don't belong here as much. Like, it almost felt like, you're here because we've allowed you to be here, so be grateful. Like, and that sort of stuff, like, kind of sticks with you. And I'm not saying that's anything intentional, and that's really not what my sermon is about, but the only reason I bring it up is because what people call you matters. Like, names have power, and that's just the absolute truth. If you have ever had to name a child, for example, you probably know this better than anybody else because naming kids is difficult, right? So first you have to decide what you want their persona to be, right? So if you want them to be the cool kid, you're going to name them Crew or Dax, right? Shout out, where are my people at? No? Okay. So, you're going to name them something like Crew or Dax. Or if you want them to be like presidential or royal or really strong leadership, you're going to name them Catherine or Lincoln, right? And then after you get your list of names, potential names that you could call them, then you start into homestretch B, where you have to start doing all of the rhymes to find out how they're going to make fun of your child, right? So, we can't call her Elizabeth because they're going to call her Elizabeth. We can't do Step on Me or Stephanie because it's going to be Step on Me, or like I call my sister Stephanie, Stephalephagus, which is an old school Sesame Street joke. But then once you figure, I got one laugh for that. Then once you figure out, like you do your little Venn diagram, names that we like versus names that are not going to emotionally scar our children, then you have your final list of 2 or 3 names, the boys' names and the girls' names, and then you like really start having the debates and the arguments about what is this kid's gonna be named, and it is stressful because that's the moment that you realize that maybe names are a bigger deal than you give them credit for. For example, can you imagine having the name Rocky in the late 70s and throughout the 80s in Oak Cliff during the gang wars? Like everybody just assumed that I was a good fighter. As a consequence, I was constantly fighting. By the way, I'm a pretty good fighter. If you want to find out, how big a boy are you? Like that's a possibility, like because names have consequences. As a matter of fact, it's so bad that I just recently read 2 articles that were published back in, I think, 2013. One was in Forbes, one was in HuffPost. And they just talked about there was this huge study done that said that what you name your kid actually will affect, your name will affect how much money you earn throughout your lifetime. And they showed that shorter names, actually, short, strong names, actually make more money. As a matter of fact, it's so bad that they estimate that the more, like every extra letter you have will cost you $3,600 in earnings a year. Yeah. In an unrelated announcement, I would like you to call me Rock. R-O-C. R-O-C. There's power in a name. And what's interesting to me is that like when we look throughout the entire history of the Bible, we see that God walks up to people with perfectly good names and he says, that is not your name anymore. Your new name is, and then he gives them a new name. And it happens more often than you probably realize in Scripture. From Abram to Abraham, from Sarai to Sarah, from Jacob to Israel, from Benoni to Benjamin. He changes Hosea's kids' names. He changes Peter's names. He changes Paul's names, etc., 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 etc. And when something happens that much in the Bible, you should probably pay attention to that because maybe God is trying to tell us something about how he's interacting with us or what it is that he thinks about us. And when you see that God is changing people's names, maybe you should start asking yourself the question, does God want to change my name? Is there something about me that is different that he wants to rename in me? And those are the kinds of questions that lead to sermons like this. And we're going to be talking about that exact same thing, but we're going to be talking about Jacob today, who's like the biggest name change that happens in the Bible. And this is an intense scripture, and we're actually going to start at the end of this. So we're going to turn to Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 through 26, and it simply says this. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said this to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Israel, God is victorious. God has prevailed. And this is a beautiful section of scripture here. What is happening here is astounding. There's like this beautiful, prophetic, life-changing message in here. And if you're really going to understand it, I have to explain the whole story to you. And it's going to be a little tedious, but I feel like you guys are up for it because you look smart. You're so handsome. You smell good today. I think you can handle this. So let's go back to the very beginning when all of this happened so that we can learn some really good stuff. And it starts with Isaac and his wife. In Genesis chapter 25, verses 21, because his wife Rebekah was barren, and they wanted a kid. So Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And we don't know this yet, but that's actually pretty good picture of what their relationship was like. They were constantly fighting. And you guys are like, kids fight, Rocky, what's the big deal? No, these guys were constantly fighting in huge ways. And it was so bad, even in the womb, that she's asking herself, she says, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? So she goes to inquire to the Lord. Like, there's so much struggling in her womb between these two babies. She actually has to go to God and find out what's going on. And his answer is this. So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Verse 24. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called him Esau, which literally means hairy one. Could you imagine, like, that's your name? Hey, Chewbacca, what's up, Chewie? Come here. Actually, I have a friend named Chewie, so I take that back. Sorry. So, like, he's so hairy that they call him Harry. And now I'm thinking about, like, all the little hairy babies that I know. Never mind. Anyway, I'm distracted. Focus. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. So in the naming of the Hebrew, Yaakov, they're doing like a play on words. They're being really clever here, right? Yaakov, which means heel. So they're like, oh, he's holding the heel, right? So, but let me explain to you what's really happening here. They're being cute, right? Because like they were constantly wrestling, right? And there's a lot of stake here because they're the firstborn sons, right? And so what they're saying is, oh, look, Jacob was trying to trip Esau even out of the womb so that he could get there first. Because what Jacob really means, like heel holder, it's like slang, right? It means to supplant, to trick, to deceive, to like put yourself in place of the other, right? And so like his whole life, people are calling him, hey, there goes Jacob, the little trickster, ah ha ha ha. And it's so funny. It's like when you laugh at little kids because they cuss until one day they're 13 and they call you the B word and start screaming and running away. And you're like, that's not as cute. You know who you are. Supplanter, the one who trips up. So you see what happened here? From the very beginning, I think this is big because Jacob came out holding his brother's heel, so he was named heel holder. And he received this name based on what he had done from the very beginning. And this is how it goes. And here's what I want you to know today, because this is really the point. People will name you according to what you have done all the time. They will pick some random characteristic or some trait about who you are or what you've done, and that will be your identity for the rest of your life. Whether you like it or not, it will follow you around. And I have to get nerdy with this because this is a real phenomenon that happens. Like sociologically, you can write this down. You can Google it later. They call it looking glass self. That was probably backwards. Self. Google it. And it's this idea that at some point, you are going to decide to become what the most influential people in your life say you are. You will live up to this. It's just a matter of nature. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. Because sometimes it works for the good. Sometimes you're a little kid and you put the blocks in perfectly and your parents start to tell you how smart you are. So for the rest of your life, the most important thing is how smart you are, how good your grades are. And if you feel like your grades aren't good enough and you're not living up to that title, you start to freak out. Or somebody's like, oh, you're going to be a little athlete. Here's a football. And then for the entire rest of your life, you're a jock. And if you don't live up to that, you're going to panic. And every single adult in here knows that there was definitely a point in time around 5th or 6th grade that you had to decide who you were going to be. Were you going to wear the cowboy boots or were you going to walk around with the Letterman jacket? Were you going to be the nerdy anime kid in the corner, or were you going to be the cheerleader? Were you going to be the smart one, or are you going to be like the dangerous loner with the motorcycle? And you know, if you are being honest, you know that that was an intentional decision. There was a day that you decided these were your people and this is who you wanted to be. And it felt intentional, but there's a lot that leads up to that moment. And you carry that around with you the rest of your life. And sometimes it's great, but sometimes it really weighs on you. Like when I was a kid, like I could draw. I still draw. Like I'm good at it, right? And so people were like, oh, well, Rocky, he's so talented. Let's get him to do this, and we'll get him to do that, and we'll put him in there. And can I be 100% honest with you? I don't like to draw. I don't. You know why I still do it? Because I'm good at it. And to me, like, that's as good a reason as any. And by the time I was a sophomore, like I was at this arts magnet, and that's all I did. I literally spent half of my day just drawing pictures that I didn't want to do. And so I quit, and I just went to normal school because I was like, this is not working for me. But like we all have this image, right? And sometimes it's because I'm Mexican. Or sometimes it's because you're a woman. Or sometimes it's because, you've got some illness or handicap, or you're the fat one, or you're the funny one, or you're the one who drinks at all the parties. And even though you don't really like drinking, and even though you didn't really drink that much, you will make up a story about how much you drink. Why? To keep your friends happy. Why? Because that's who you are, and you have to keep up appearances, and it's exhausting. And I wish I could say that it didn't really work this way, but it does. And the only reason that I need you to know any of this, because this is fundamental. It's one thing to be called something, but when you get to that point, when you finally make the decision to submit to that, that's where you're in trouble. The one thing I know for certain is that this is the game that the devil plays. Right, because our thought is going to be like the way that the devil hinders us the most damage that he can cause to you is by the temptation that he gives you. No. The most damage that the devil causes to you is when you let him tell you who you are. Then you're in trouble. That's how Satan steals you of joy. That's how the devil steals you of destiny. When he can tell you what your value is and you start to be believing that, I'm the idiot, I'm the jock, I'm the druggie, I'm the slut, I'm the fat one, I'm the dumb one, I'm the smart one, I'm the mom, I'm the dad, I'm the CEO, I am, all of these things. When he can convince you of who you are, then he's got you and he can do real damage. And some of you are like, living in the wake of that damage because you feel the pressure. And you're like, I don't know how long I can keep this up. Because at the end of the day, when you're living an inauthentic life, it doesn't produce in you joy. You just walk around scared and anxious and stressed all day. And that's not a way to live your life. That's a dangerous game. So let me ask you a question. The devil's going to come up to you and he's going to tell you, you are the worst thing about you. You are the weakest moment you've ever had. You are the worst day of your life. You are the least important thing, the least important characteristic of yourself. That is who you are. But how, church? How can you live in victory if you are defined by your defeats? How is that possible? It's not. You can't live in victory if your identity is your defeats. That's not possible, and it's not God's plan. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 25, verses 29 through 34, because we're going to see how Jacob's name, supplanter, trickster, deceiver, plays out, right? And there's something very important to happen here. Let me give you some historical context. When you are the oldest boy in a family in this culture, you receive two things. One, you receive the birthright. So let me explain birthright to you. If you have two kids, you're going to leave them all of your stuff because you can't take anything to heaven, right? So if you have two kids, you're going to divide all your stuff and all your wealth by 3, right? And the oldest kid gets 2 portions of that. He gets the one plus another, and that extra portion is called the birthright. And then the second thing is like this prophetic blessing over your life. Like the authority and the goodness and the promise and the plan, like is passed from father to son. Like this is who you are. It's a blessing. This is what God is going to do in your life. It's this wonderful thing that happens. So once, here in verse 29, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field. He was hunting. And he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat something of that red stew, for I am exhausted." And Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright." Like literally, he's saying, like, I'm so exhausted, I'm going to die, which like makes me wonder what happened on this hunting trip. Like, how tired can you get sitting in a deer blind? The fact that Esau was born first meant that he was supposed to get this birthright, but Jacob is like, "Sell it to me." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate and drank and rose and went his way. And thus Esau despised his birthright. Man, that's a thing. It's just like, let me kick you when you're down. Yeah, I'll feed you, brother. I see that you're dying because I don't know what happened to your deer blind, but it must have been serious because you look terrible. Esau, I don't know if he was just a bad hunter or what. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. The point is this. Is that Jacob saw that moment and he took advantage of it for his own advantage. Tripping his brother up, supplanting, deceiving, tricking. Years pass, and Isaac, their father, is about to pass away. So he calls Esau in to him, and he says, "I'm about to die. Go hunt and kill and cook me that food that I like, and I'll give you my blessing." This is Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 through 4. So Rebekah knows her sons, right? And Jacob is actually Rebekah's favorite because Jacob is a bit of a mama's boy. And Esau is like all boy and hung out with his dad all the time. So Isaac is like, "Esau, go hunting, go get that food that makes some stew that I like." And Rebekah's like, "I know that Esau's terrible at hunting, so he's going to be gone a long time." No, I don't know that. But she goes to her son Jacob and she's like, "Hey, your dad's about to die. Why don't you go kill a goat? And I'll make some stew the way that your dad likes it, and you'll pretend to be Esau, and then you'll get the family blessing." And Jacob's like, "How is that going to work, Mom? Esau's hairy, and I'm like perfectly groomed and manscaped. Look at this beautifulness." And she's like, "No, we'll take this is crazy. She's like, "We'll take the goat skin and like put it on your hand," which leads me to think, how hairy was Esau? Like really hairy. So they go in and she makes the stew and Isaac's not falling for it. He's like, "Man, that was really fast." And because he's blind, but he's not deaf. And he's like, you look like Esau, but you sound like Jacob. What's coming here?" And so he says, verse 21, he says, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac's, his father, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he recognized him because his hands were hairy like his brother. Really? Esau has goat hands. Like, that's my takeaway. End of sermon. Esau has goat hands. Go be blessed. No, I'm just kidding. So he blessed him, and he said, and he says, "Are you really my son Esau?" And you're just thinking, no, goat boy here is not Esau, it's Jacob. He's tricking you. But somehow, like, this deception works. And Jacob has his brother's birthright and the blessing. And he got everything. And Jacob is leaving, and Esau comes in to receive his blessing from his dad. And Isaac says, "Who are you?" And Esau says, "It's me, it's Esau. I've come for my blessing." And Isaac realizes in that moment that he's been tricked. And in chapter 27, verse 35, he says, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." And Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" And this is basically the heart of it. This is where we see really what Jacob's name means, because even in his whole family, he's using the name as a curse word. No wonder he's named Jacob. No wonder his name is Heel. Within his family, his name had become synonymous with deception and selfishness and theft. And then Esau vows, because he's so angry, he says, "After dad dies, I'm going to kill Jacob." So do you think that Jacob stuck around to be murdered after his dad died? No, that boy took off. So he goes and he stays with his uncle Laban, and it's just deception and trick, deception and trick. The first one is he goes and he tries to marry this girl that he falls in love with, and he says, "Hey, let me marry your daughter." They were cousins. We don't have to talk about it. Whatever. Don't marry your cousins. But he goes and he says, "Hey, let me marry this daughter. I'm in love with her. She's beautiful." And so he works for 7 years. And at the end of 7 years, Laban tricks him. You reap what you sow, right? Laban tricks him and forces him to marry the other daughter. He gets to his wedding tent. I don't know what was going on, but he didn't realize it wasn't Rachel. It was old Leah, which means cow eyes. I don't know what that means, except for she had cow eyes. So, and he's like, "What is happening?" And I just keep thinking, how drunk were you, Jacob, that you didn't even recognize it was a different woman? Men are gross. Anyway, so the next day, they work out a new deal, and just for the next 20 years, it's just trick, deception, trick, deception, trick, deception, trick, deception, con, and it's exhausting. They have disputes about land. They have disputes about sheep. They have disputes about wives. They have disputes about just all of this stuff, all of this time. Meanwhile, Jacob is using it all to his advantage, accumulating wealth until it gets to this point to where it is so bad, so much exhausting drama is happening that he has to leave. So him and his family leave. But Jacob doesn't want to leave. Why? Because his brother Chewbacca is waiting to kill him. Things have to be pretty bad. He's running out of options. He'd rather go risk being slaughtered by his brother than stay there any longer. But of course, Rachel's like, "Hey, I have a plan." To get back at her dad, she steals all the family idols, which are really, really expensive, and she hides them, and his whole crew is going off into the desert, and Laban finds out, and he's like, "Hey, they stole the family idols." And then they go chase, this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and then they go chasing him, and it turns out, to hide them, Rachel just, hid them under her dress and kneeled down on the ground, and they're like, "Hey, we need to search you for the idols." She's like, "I'm on my period." And even then, men knew not to mess with that. So she got away with it. It's exhausting. This story is exhausting. Jacob is constantly scheming, and even in this moment, he knows that his brother is coming for him. And he splits his family and all his stuff up into 2 camps. And the reason he does that is so that if his brother slaughters one wife and 1 set of kids and steals all his stuff, he still has the bonus set. This is the kind of man that he was. But it wasn't working, and he gets to this point to where every struggle, every trick is catching up to him, and he's exhausted. So it's the night before Jacob's day of reckoning with Esau, and he's all alone, and he's freaking out. And he goes to this place to just think and pray. And that's where we started. Genesis chapter 32, verses 24 through 28. And Jacob was left alone. And a man, this was no man after all, it was the Lord. All of Jacob's life, he had been wrestling and fighting with all the people. But now he finds himself wrestling with God. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint, and he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Do you think that God forgot Jacob's name? He didn't forget Jacob's name. There's a couple of things that I need you to understand here. One is, the first is this, that when someone gives you their name in a situation like this, within this context, it's a surrender. Right? It's like when two little kids are wrestling and one of them says, "Uncle." It's a tap out. He's like, "Uncle, uncle, uncle." So here's Jacob he's fighting and he's exhausted and he's tired and he's holding on to God and he says, "I won't let you go until you bless me." And God says, "What is your name?" And it's Jacob, and it's Jacob submitting. And I have to tell you this because sometimes when we read this story, we think that Jacob is like some heroic victor who went down to the desert and fought the Lord and won. And that's not what's happening. This isn't the devil went down to Georgia. This is something different, and we can find context for this in Hosea chapter 12, verses 3 through 4, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. It says, "In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood he strove or fought with God. He strove with the angel and he prevailed." And listen to this, "He wept and he sought his favor. He met God at Bethel. And there God spoke to us." And the thing that I want you to notice here is that Jacob is weeping. Jacob is wrestling with God and he's weeping. And why is he clinging to God? He's clinging to God out of desperation. He's not controlling God here. He has no options. This is it. This thing that he was known for, this thing that he'd been fighting with, this thing that he'd been using to preserve this identity, it's not working anymore. And he is desperately clinging to God, weeping, asking him to bless him. Why? Because that was his only hope. So two things. The first is that when Jacob gives his name in this context, he is tapping out. And the second thing is Jacob is confessing. Because when he's saying his name and God is like, "Who are you?" He says, "My name is Jacob. Jacob, I'm the liar. Jacob, I'm the deceiver. Jacob, I'm the hustler. Jacob, I'm the supplanter." I am confessing who I am in that moment. And what is God's response to him? "Tell me who you are." "I'm the liar. I'm the thief. I'm the swindler. I'm the hustler." God says, "No, that is not who you are. That is no longer your name." Can you imagine the relief that was to Israel in that moment? Because God changed his name and he said, "You have wrestled with God and man, and the Lord has been victorious, so your name is Israel." If you don't remember any of that, remember this. Only God can tell you who you are. Only God can tell you who you are, because we're going to get to that point where we have to realize that we desperately need God, and he says to you who you are, and you're like, "I'm the liar, I'm the adulterer, I'm the thief, I'm the idiot, I'm the alcoholic, I'm the depressed, I'm the anxious, I'm the whatever, etc., etc., etc." And he's like, "No, that's not who you are. You are my child. You are who I say you are. That's your identity. You find that in me. I give that to you because I have fought for you. I have bought you with a price. You belong to me." Why is it so easy for us to believe the lies of the devil? Like we fall for it every time. And we sit and like we desperately cling to these identities that we hate, these things that we can't live up to, these things that are gross and meaningless, and yet they have all this power. And today, I just want you to be free from that. I want you to know that you don't have to believe that about yourself anymore. You can believe your God. You can believe that you have value and identity and purpose that was freely given to you and paid for by Him. And when you belong to Him, there is no one thing, no sin, no disease, no action, no name, no nothing that can ever take that away from you. Because it's who you are. You are who you say He is. You are who He says you are. You are nothing less than that. My prayer for you today is that you find freedom in that. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you for my brothers and sisters. And this week, in this moment, in your Spirit, I pray that you are speaking out to them right now, Lord. That you are touching their hearts, that you are shattering and freeing them from lies and strongholds that they have held about themselves for years. And I pray that in your mercy, in your grace, and in your goodness, and in your kindness, and in your righteousness, that you would shatter those things and destroy them completely. And right now, this week, today, sometime, Lord, that you would whisper in their ears, this is who I say you are. And that they would find rest, and they would find peace, and they would find strength in that. Father, you can heal all of that brokenness, Lord. You can free them from all of those things. You can change their lives forever. Father, please, in your goodness, confront them. Force their hands. Talk to them. And in your mercy, give them the faith to hear you. In Christ's name.